You can't fish here. This is private property. The voice snapped through the crisp morning air like a whip, sharp enough to send a flock of birds scattering from the trees behind me. I turned my head slowly, eyes narrowing at the sight of a tall woman in yoga pants and a neon green hoodie speedwalking toward me, her phone already raised like a badge of authority. She looked angry, not annoyed, not concerned. Angry. The kind of angry that bubbles when there's nothing real to be mad about, so it latches onto whatever it can find. In this case, a man, quietly fishing, on the edge of a lake that belonged to him. I'd barely gotten my line in the water. She stopped 10 feet away, planting her sneakers like she was squaring up for a fight. Did you not see the HOA sign? No fishing without community approval. I stayed seated on my little folding stool, hands calm, voice even. Morning. This is my land. I own this lot. And the lakefront that comes with it. She scoffed, lips curling like I just told her the earth was flat. That's not how it works here. The HOA has full jurisdiction over shared environmental resources. Her mouth was full of buzzwords and borrowed power. I didn't flinch. Ma'am, this stretch of shoreline is deeded with my property. Has been since I bought it 11 years ago. You might want to check the plat map before throwing around rules. She blinked. Then her voice rose, shrill enough to cut glass. I live here too. I've been on the board for 3 years, and I've never seen you at a meeting. I smiled, but not with joy. You're right. I try to keep my weekends peaceful. She took that personally. You could see it in the way her jaw tightened, in the fire suddenly sparking in her eyes. I'm calling the cops. And before I could say anything else, she was tapping furiously on her phone, pacing in place like some overcharged mall security guard. I sat there quietly, letting the cool breeze from the lake touch my face. Now would be a good time to hit that like button if you've ever had a run-in with an HOA-Karen who thought she ruled the world. And if you want to hear what happened when my son got involved, stick around. You won't want to miss this. She made the call loud enough for everyone in the next zip code to hear. Yes, I'm at Lake Willow Grove. There's a man trespassing and illegally fishing near Lot 41. He refuses to leave. He's being aggressive. Pause. Yes, white male, maybe late 40s. Blue hoodie, brown cap. I feel threatened. Threatened? I hadn't even stood up. My hands stayed relaxed on my knees. My fishing pole didn't twitch. Nancy, I didn't know her name yet, but she looked like a Nancy, kept glaring at me like I was seconds away from committing some heinous crime against suburban order. Help is on the way, she announced with triumph in her voice. You'd better have your ID ready. I tilted my head slightly. I will. And the deed too. Just in case you're planning to rewrite property laws today. That made her flush with rage. You think this is funny? No, ma'am, I said honestly. I think it's sad. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I could hear her pacing behind me, throwing angry glances, muttering to herself. I didn't move. I didn't pack up. I just let the water do its thing, line dancing gently in the breeze. Somewhere across the lake, a duck quacked. Somewhere behind me, justice idled in neutral. Then the cruiser pulled up. 2 officers stepped out. Local boys, young, mid-20s, wearing the half-tired expressions of men who've seen this song and danced too many times. Nancy rushed to them like she'd just found backup in a battlefield. There he is, she cried, pointing at me. I told him to leave. He's trespassing. I want him cited. One of the officers nodded politely, then approached me. Sir, can we talk for a second? I stood slowly, wiping my hands on my jeans. Sure thing, officer. I've got everything you need in the glove box of my truck. Ninner. Nancy was still ranting in the background as I led them to my vehicle, a few yards up from the shoreline. I pulled out a file folder, labeled HOA Deed Tax Plat Map in Sharpie, and handed it over. The first officer opened it. His eyebrows twitched upward. This is pretty thorough. I've had this happen before, I said simply. While he flipped pages, I watched the other officer trying to calm Nancy down. She wasn't having it. He's lying. I've lived here longer than he has. I've been on the board. This is our lake. The first officer held up a page. According to this, Lot 41 includes 30 feet of lakefront, deeded separately from the shared access areas. And here's the tax bill. It checks out. Nancy stormed over. That doesn't matter. The HOA rules supersede individual deeds. That land is part of the environmental buffer zone. The officer looked at her patiently. Ma'am, unless the HOA has a legal easement or a specific override provision, which it does not according to this, then the property owner has full rights to use his deeded land. Nancy stared at him like he'd grown a second head. This is absurd. I'm going to file a formal complaint. You're welcome to, the officer said, handing me back the folder. But from what I see here, he's within his rights. She turned red, full red. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. I want your badge numbers. They gave them to her without fuss. I thanked them calmly and turned to walk back to my fishing spot. But I didn't get more than 10 steps before my phone buzzed. It was my son. Dad, everything okay? I saw a call come through dispatch about a disturbance near your lake. Some HOA member complaining? I chuckled. Yeah, all under control, but if you're free, say no more. Be there in 10. I looked over at Nancy. She was still yelling something to the officers, waving her arms around like she was directing traffic with rage. She had no idea who she'd just tangled with, and no idea what was coming. By the time I'd gotten back to my spot and cast my line again, the sun had fully crested the trees. The lake sparkled like glass under its rays, and for a moment, just a moment, it almost felt like peace had returned. But then came the pacing. Nancy hadn't left. She was still there, strutting angrily up and down the gravel path behind me like a caged tiger, phone glued to her ear. I couldn't hear the exact words, but the tone was unmistakable. Frantic indignation. She was probably calling every contact she had in the HOA directory, maybe even trying the community lawyer. I let her stew in it. I had nothing left to prove. The cops had done their job, and the facts were the facts. My land, my lakefront, my morning. But then my truck rumbled. I turned around, and there he was. My son, 6'1", clean-cut, broad-shouldered, dressed in his deputy uniform, complete with the crisp badge, tactical boots, and mirrored sunglasses. I couldn't help but smile. He didn't park. He just rolled up slowly, window down. Hey, old man, he called out casually, lips tugging into a grin. You causing trouble again? I chuckled and shook my head. Not this time. Nancy, who had been mid-call, turned like a vulture spotting fresh prey. The sight of a uniform sparked something new in her, confidence mixed with desperation. She strutted over to his window like she owned the pavement. Finally, thank God someone competent showed up. That man, she pointed at me without looking, is trespassing and refusing to comply with HOA regulations. The officers who were here before completely mishandled the situation. I want him removed. My son raised one eyebrow behind his shades. Trespassing, huh? Yes, she said firmly, crossing her arms. He's fishing on restricted shoreline. It violates Section 4C of the Willow Grove Environmental Use Charter. There was a pause, then he stepped out of the vehicle. All 6'1" of him stood tall in front of her, calm and composed, letting the silence work for him. He looked at me. I nodded slightly. I'm Deputy Marcus Taylor, ma'am, he said, voice level, but with that edge that lets people know they're not in charge. And you are? Nancy Keller, HOA board member, Enforcement Committee. I know my rights. He nodded. Sure you do. Mind if I see your HOA ID or board documentation? She hesitated. I don't have it on me. No problem, he said. I'll look you up. He pulled out a small tablet from his cruiser, tapped a few things in, and then looked back at her. Looks like you've been cited before, Ms. Keller. Couple of nuisance complaints, false reports, one unresolved infraction from last July about harassment toward a neighbor's contractor. Her face twisted. Those were all misunderstandings. Maybe, but I'm seeing a pattern here. I sat quietly behind them, reeling in my lines slowly, the rhythm of the spool soothing in contrast to the tension in the air. Nancy's voice dropped half an octave. This is not about me. That man is fishing where he shouldn't be. He's a threat to community order. Marcus turned slightly, his posture relaxed but intentional. Ma'am, the property deed for Lot 41 includes 30 feet of shoreline. That stretch right there, he pointed to where my tackle box sat, is privately owned and legally permitted for recreational use. She opened her mouth, but he cut her off, gently but firmly. This isn't a matter of community order. It's a matter of personal boundary, and you crossed his. For a moment, she didn't move. She just blinked. Her brain was recalculating. Then she tried again. I'm going to file an official complaint with the sheriff's office, with the HOA council, with the county if I have to. You're welcome to, Marcus said calmly. But I'll also be filing a report. Your behavior this morning falls under harassment, misuse of emergency services, and unauthorized enforcement of HOA regulations. That last part hit her like a slap. You can't do that, he nodded. I can, and I will. I watched her shoulders sag just slightly. It wasn't total defeat. People like her don't break all at once. But the fight had been sucked out of her voice. She looked around like hoping someone, anyone, might be watching and take her side. No one was. The lake was still. The road was empty. It was just us. I think it's best you head home, Ms. Keller, Marcus said, adjusting his belt slightly. We're done here. She didn't reply, just turned and walked away. Quick steps, tight fists, muttering under her breath. I didn't catch the words, but I didn't need to. They were meant for her, not for us. When she was out of sight, Marcus turned to me, pulled off his sunglasses, and let out a breath. You always pick the best times to go fishing, I laughed. I swear I didn't even see her coming. 1 minute I'm baiting a hook, next thing I know I'm getting threatened with HOA bylaws. He walked over, crouched beside me, and looked out at the lake. She's been a problem for months, he said. We've had complaints from at least 4 different households about her. Power tripping, harassing kids on bikes, accusing the Wilsons of non-regulation Halloween decor in October. Sounds about right. He gave me a look. You sure you don't want to sell this place and come live closer to us? I shook my head. Not a chance. If I moved, who would teach the HOA a lesson every now and then? He grinned. I cast the line again. And for the first time that morning, the lake was quiet in the way it's supposed to be. The sun had climbed higher now, throwing a warm shimmer across the water. A heron stood still at the far end of the shoreline, barely a ripple beneath its feet. Marcus and I sat in silence, the kind that only happens between 2 people who don't need to fill it. But I could feel something shifting. Nancy wasn't the type to walk away without a plan. Think she'll come back? I asked, keeping my eyes on the float bobbing gently on the water's surface. Marcus shrugged. If she's smart, no. But I don't think she's running on logic anymore. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. My son knew this wasn't just about a piece of land or a Saturday morning. This was about control, about someone who thought authority was a weapon instead of a responsibility. And people like that, they don't give up easily. He stood and stretched. I'm going to talk to a few folks around the neighborhood, get ahead of whatever drama she's about to stir up. I nodded. Be careful. He grinned. Dad, it's a retirement neighborhood with duck ponds. I think I'll survive. Still, something in my gut didn't sit right. I stayed on the dock another hour, maybe 2. I didn't catch anything worth keeping, but that wasn't the point. The point was to reclaim what was mine, my peace, my right to sit at the edge of my own lake without being treated like a criminal. By the time I packed up, the wind had picked up a bit. The sky was turning a soft kind of golden, the light you only get right before sunset. I loaded my gear into the truck and drove the short path back to the house. The moment I pulled into the driveway, I saw it, a white SUV parked across the street. Nancy. She wasn't alone. 2 other people stood beside her, one of them holding a clipboard. I recognized them from an HOA bulletin that had been shoved in my mailbox months ago. Board members. The other guy was thinner, with a tight haircut and a smug look that screamed legal intern with too much caffeine. Nancy saw me pull up and crossed her arms triumphantly. Her voice rose even before I opened the truck door. We've reviewed the community bylaws and confirmed that your use of the shoreline violates Environmental Ordinance 7A. I stared at her for a moment. That's not enforceable without a change to the deed, and you know it. The man with the clipboard stepped forward, clearing his throat. Mr. Taylor, the board has voted unanimously to issue a formal warning. If you do not comply with cessation of private fishing activity, We will escalate the matter to county mediation. I almost laughed. You're handing me a warning for fishing on my land? He gave a tight-lipped nod. Yes, sir. And what exactly do you plan to mediate? Nancy interrupted before he could answer. Your presence on the shoreline is disruptive. It creates the perception of rule-breaking and invites others to violate the HOA's expectations of environmental stewardship. Perception? I echoed. That's what this is about now? Not facts, not deeds, just perception? The clipboard guy looked uncomfortable. He didn't answer. Then Marcus's cruiser pulled up again. He stepped out slowly, sunglasses off, reading the mood like a soldier walking into a potential ambush. His eyes flicked from me, to Nancy, to the clipboard. What's going on here? Nancy puffed up like a blowfish. This is internal HOA business. It doesn't concern the sheriff's office. Actually, Marcus said, stepping closer, it does concern us if harassment is involved. Again, clipboard man shifted. We're simply delivering a formal warning, in writing. Marcus took the paper, read it silently, then folded it and slipped it into his pocket. This isn't legally binding, and unless you're representing a recognized authority beyond the HOA, you're trespassing on private property. Nancy exploded. This whole thing is about him thinking he's above the rules. Marcus didn't even raise his voice. No, this is about you thinking the rules give you power over people. There was a pause. One of those long ones, where time slows just enough for the message to sink in. Then he added, we've had complaints. Not just today. Not just from us. Clipboard guy opened his mouth, then closed it again. The second board member, an older woman with tight lips and a tighter grip on her purse, muttered something under her breath and turned to leave. I suggest you all do the same, Marcus said, calm but firm. Nancy looked like she might burst. Fine, she snapped, snatching the paper back from his hand. But this isn't over. She turned on her heel and marched to the SUV. The others followed, one less confident than the next. The car peeled off with more force than necessary, tires crunching the gravel like protest. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Marcus walked over and leaned against my truck. You okay? He asked. I am now. He smirked. You know, most people just barbecue or mow the lawn on the weekends. I chuckled. Where's the fun in that? We stood there a while longer, watching the sun sink low across the water. Want me to file an official report? He asked. I thought about it, then shook my head. Not yet. Let her spin her wheels a little more. She'll dig her own hole. He nodded, but even then, I knew. This wasn't over. Not yet. 3 days passed. I didn't fish. Didn't even walk down to the lake. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew Nancy. I knew people like her. The kind who get louder when they're ignored. The kind who mistake silence for surrender. I let her make the next move, and sure enough, she did. It came in the form of a certified letter from the HOA. Thick envelope, official logo, language soaked in pseudo-legal threats, a cease and desist order referencing violations of the Environmental Charter, disruption of community harmony, and non-compliance with advisory measures. It also mentioned a pending fine, $400, for willful defiance of HOA guidelines. I sat at the kitchen table, holding the letter in one hand and a coffee mug in the other. Across from me, Marcus read through it with the expression of a man trying not to laugh. She really went for it, he said. She's building a case, I replied. Or trying to. He flipped to the last page. This is fluff. There's no enforcement mechanism, no signature from council, just 3 board members and a threat. She wants a reaction. He looked up. Are you going to give her one? Yeah, I said, standing up, but not the one she's expecting. That afternoon, I called my neighbor Greg, retired real estate attorney, sharp as a tack, with a golf tan and a deep hatred of HOA drama. Bring the letter, he said, and a beer. By sunset, we were sitting on his patio, breeze moving through the trees, documents spread across the table like battle plans. Greg tapped the fine print. They overstepped. The HOA can't modify your property rights without a supermajority vote and recorded amendment. They can issue warnings, but they have no legal power to enforce fines on deeded land unless it's in your purchase covenant, which it's not. He leaned back, sipping. You want to crush this now or let it play out? I want it to end, but I want it to end. No more surprises, no more Karen patrol at my dock. He nodded. Then you'll need to speak at the next board meeting. Publicly? He smiled. Politely, calmly, with documentation. You bury this kind of thing with facts. I agreed. We set a date. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a beige, over-air-conditioned box with folding chairs and a mic that squeaked every time someone touched it. About 30 people showed up, more than I expected. Nancy sat front and center, clipboard on her lap like it was a shield. She wore a power blazer over workout leggings. A woman prepared for war. The board called the meeting to order. Third item on the agenda, community use of natural resources. Discussion. That was me. I stepped up to the mic. Good evening, I began. My name is John Taylor. I live on Lot 41. I'd like to address the recent complaints made regarding my use of the lakefront attached to my property. I held up a folder, copies of the deed, tax records, and plat maps. This documentation shows that the shoreline I use is not community property. It is deeded, taxable land under my ownership. That includes fishing, docking, and maintenance rights. Murmurs moved through the crowd. I understand the importance of preserving our shared environment, I continued, but this is not about pollution, noise, or safety. This is about harassment, misuse of HOA authority, and frankly, a personal agenda masquerading as policy. Someone clapped, then another. Nancy stood up. Point of order. He's making accusations without basis. I didn't flinch. You've called the police on residents, filed false reports, and issued warnings that have no legal foundation. The room quieted. Then Marcus stood up in the back. Deputy Marcus Taylor, Sheriff's Department. Just for the record, we've received multiple complaints about harassment and misuse of emergency services linked to one individual on the HOA board. Nancy turned white. Marcus added, We're currently reviewing those cases. Dead silence. The president of the board, a quiet man in his 60s who looked like he hated conflict more than anything else, cleared his throat. Thank you, Mr. Taylor. We'll review your documentation, and we'll be tabling the enforcement of any fines related to shoreline activity until legal counsel reviews the matter. Nancy stormed out before the meeting ended. She was removed from the board the next week. The vote wasn't close. 14-3. I never saw her walk the lake path again. Her house went up for sale 2 months later. Rumor had it she moved in with her sister across the state. Nobody cried. And just like that, peace returned. Not dramatic, not explosive. Just quiet, which in a neighborhood like mine is the loudest kind of victory. 2 weeks later, I stood at the edge of the lake again. Same stool, same rod, same rhythm. The only difference was the silence. Not the forced, tense kind, real silence. Peace, the kind that settles over water like a blanket at dusk. The HOA drama had died down, completely. No letters in the mailbox, no surprise visits, no white SUVs parked across the street. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had my home back. Marcus had stopped by earlier in the day, dropping off a copy of the final HOA meeting minutes. The vote to remove Nancy from the board had passed with near unanimous support. They'd even discussed implementing new language to prevent future misuse of authority. Progress, he'd said with a shrug. I'd nodded, grateful, not just for the policy changes, but for him, for the fact that when it came down to it, my son had shown up, not just as family, but as someone who stood between nonsense and justice with a badge and a backbone. The sun dipped lower, staining the surface of the lake orange and gold. I reeled in the line, not because I needed to, but because it felt like the right moment. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Not fast, not aggressive, just slow and steady. I turned and saw Greg approaching with 2 beers and a smirk. Thought you could use one, he said, handing it over. I took it, popped the cap, and nodded toward the water. Not a single bite, he laughed. Doesn't matter. You already caught the big one? We sat in silence for a while, sipping, watching the lake settle. Never thought she'd actually get voted out, I said finally. Greg snorted. John, people like Nancy always think they're smarter than everyone else. But what they don't understand is that patience beats volume. Every time. I nodded. He was right. It wasn't about shouting louder. It was about holding the line, quietly, steadily, with facts and calm. It was about showing up when it mattered and waiting when it didn't. That's what broke her. Not revenge, not rage, just truth. We finished the beers. Greg patted my shoulder and headed home, leaving me alone again at the water's edge. Twilight had set in now, the sky bruised purple, the trees casting long shadows over the bank. Crickets had begun their chorus, and somewhere across the lake, a frog croaked its slow, lazy song. I stood up, slung the tackle box over one shoulder, and took a final look at the water. Calm, still, mine. Just as I was turning to leave, my phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. "How's the lake?" I smiled and texted back. "Quiet, just how I like it." Then I paused and added, "Your grandpa used to say something. Justice takes time, but when it comes clean." I finally get what he meant. I slid the phone into my pocket and walked up the hill toward the house, the last light of the day casting long shadows behind me. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I was just going home.